The chapter opens with an arrogant mockery from the alien council, who consider humanity a minor threat, but the unexpected arrival of a human battleship flips their perception. As the council laughs at Earth's primitive weaponry, they learn the hard way that underestimating humanity is a dangerous game. The alien council room buzzed with quiet arrogance, the councillors seated in their high-backed chairs, their eyes glowing with superiority. A massive holographic display hovered before them, a map of the galaxy. It was business as usual for the Council of Rilthar, their vast empire stretching across countless systems. They had crushed rebellion after rebellion, and the idea of humans, primitive, pathetic earthlings, waging war was laughable. Humanity is nothing but a relic of a forgotten time, Councillor Zithar sneered, his tentacle-like fingers tapping the armrest. Their ships are nothing more than rusted ruins, stumbling through space. A collective chuckle rippled through the room, the mocking laughter echoing off the walls. They had dealt with lesser species before. Earth's attempt to defy the Galactic Order was no different. We should let them come, another councillor, Vrish, said with a huff. It will be an amusing distraction, nothing more. But their smirks faltered the moment the holographic display flickered and an unexpected transmission blipped on their screens. Incoming signal from Earth, a voice echoed from the control room. Let me guess, Zithar muttered. A futile surrender? The holographic screen split, showing the chaotic transmission from the human ship. The image was grainy, shaky, yet it was unmistakable. The silhouette of a massive battleship, its form barely visible in the background of an enormous, starry void. The ship was human. Earth had sent a vessel, but not just any vessel, an intimidating one. You've made a mistake, the voice crackled through the transmission. A human commander, his face stern, not a hint of fear in his eyes. We may be primitive, but we fight with everything we have. The alien council froze. This wasn't what they had expected. What's this? Vrish's voice wavered slightly. The display zoomed in on the ship. It was colossal, primitive in its design, but terrifyingly powerful. The engines alone seemed to pulse with an unrelenting energy. Something about the ship felt dangerous. Suddenly, there was a flicker of movement, then a thunderous explosion. A nearby asteroid, once quiet, erupted in an unnatural explosion of fire and debris. The transmission screen zoomed out to reveal the aftermath. A catastrophic blast that resonated with an unearthly shockwave. The entire council felt the force through the display as if they had been directly impacted. A slight tremor ran through the room. Zithar started but couldn't finish his sentence. His mind reeled. This wasn't just an old ship. This wasn't just some human relic. This was power, and it wasn't the last of it. In the stunned silence, the commander's voice came through again, a cold, emotionless remark. We are only getting started. The council hesitated. They looked at one another, their once unshakable belief in their superiority cracking. A flicker of doubt echoed in the room, and that was before Earth even responded. The room, which had once been filled with confident mockery, now carried an unsettling air. The laughter had stopped. Zithar's voice was low, shaky. Prepare for the worst. The transmissions began to buzz again. More ships, more humanity, but no one had anticipated the blood that would soon be spilled. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. The unexpected destruction of the asteroid, witnessed by the alien council, is a sharp reminder that humanity is not to be underestimated. The initial tension of disbelief quickly escalates into fear, making the aliens question everything they thought they knew about Earth. The aliens initially believe Earth's ships are nothing more than outdated, clumsy relics of a bygone era. However, the immediate threat of Earth's sudden retaliation shatters this view, signaling a shift in the tactical balance. The moment the alien council realizes that humanity's primitive technology has the power to destroy is both chilling and awe-inspiring. What happens when the underdog, presumed powerless, becomes the most dangerous force in the galaxy? The alien ships, once a symbol of unrivaled dominance across the stars, now drifted in uneasy silence. The atmosphere aboard the flagship of the Rilthar Empire was tense, the council members still trying to recover from the shock of what they had just witnessed. They had underestimated humanity, and now that mistake was setting in like a slow burn. The transmission from Earth had shown only the tip of the iceberg, and deep within their ranks, doubt was beginning to gnaw at the edges of their pride. Councillor Zithar paced back and forth in the chamber, his once poised figure now a frayed reflection of his earlier self-assurance. His sharp, beady eyes darted back and forth, and his breathing was heavier than usual. For the first time in his long career, Zithar felt vulnerable. The humans had done something no one had expected. They had forced the Rilthar to confront their own arrogance. "We've made a terrible mistake," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. A low murmur rippled through the chamber as the other councillors exchanged glances. There were no words of comfort, no assurances of victory, just silence. "Zithar, what are your orders?" The question came from Vrish, the youngest of the council, her tone filled with a mix of fear and confusion. Zithar stopped pacing and turned to her slowly. He had always been the voice of reason in the council, the one who could predict the next move with cold precision. But now, he wasn't sure of anything. "Prepare the fleet," Zithar said, his voice stiff, a forced calm attempting to mask his rising anxiety. "We cannot ignore this any longer. Those humans, they're not what we thought." Vrish hesitated before nodding, but the unease in her eyes spoke volumes. The whole council felt the weight of the decision they were about to make. What they once believed to be a victory, an easy conquest, was now rapidly shifting into a nightmare. They were unprepared for. "Are you suggesting we engage them?" Another councillor named Zithar spoke up, his voice more of a growl than a question. His scaly green skin shimmered with the subtle tension in the air, and his sharp claws tapped anxiously on the armrest of his chair. "Do you realize what you're asking? They are primitive. Their technology is barely functional compared to ours. It's a bluff, Zithar, a desperate last attempt from a dying species." Zithar stared at Zithar, his nostrils flaring. "A bluff? What part of that explosion looked like a bluff? What part of that made you think these humans are any less than a force to be reckoned with?" Zithar opened his mouth to retort, but faltered. Zithar's words had struck too deep. The blast from the asteroid wasn't just an ordinary explosion. It was calculated, controlled. The human commander had been calm, detached, like someone who had planned every move down to the smallest detail. That wasn't the behavior of a desperate species. That was a statement. "We cannot afford to underestimate them," Zithar continued, his voice heavy with the weight of impending decisions. "They may be primitive, but they're not without their resources, and they know how to use them." Vrish's voice trembled as she spoke. "What do you suggest, Zithar? If we engage them now, it's not just their ships we'll be facing. It's their entire willpower. The humans will fight to the last. They've already shown us that." Zithar clenched his fists, feeling the reality of their situation settle into his bones. He had always seen humanity as weak, their technological capabilities laughable compared to the Rilthars. But now, that arrogance had been replaced with an unsettling realization. The humans were capable of far more than he had ever imagined. What had once been seen as their flaw, their unpredictability, had become their greatest strength. "We have no choice," Zithar said, a grim finality in his voice. "We will face them, but we'll do so on our terms. We will draw them in, use their overconfidence against them, let them believe they've won, and then we'll strike, The humans won't know what hit them. The rest of the council shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had all felt the shift, the subtle change in the air. What was once a calculated conquest now felt like a precarious game of chance. The stakes had escalated beyond anything they had prepared for, and yet Zithar's command was clear. They had no option but to follow. Across the void, the human fleet moved like a quiet storm, their ships gliding through space with deliberate precision. The fleet commander, Captain Rylan Hayes, sat in his command chair aboard the flagship, his eyes fixed on the star map ahead. His face was hard, expressionless, but his mind was far from calm. The transmission from the Rilthar Council had been brief, but its implications were clear. The Rilthar had underestimated them. They had expected an easy fight, a slaughter, and now they would face the full might of humanity's retaliation. Prepare. For battle, Captain Hayes ordered, his voice a low growl. Activate the fleet's defensive systems and prepare weapons for the first volley. I don't care if they think they've won. We're not just going to survive this. We're going to make them regret ever thinking they could challenge us. His officers, standing at attention, nodded in silent acknowledgement. Each of them knew that this was the moment that would define humanity's future. If they succeeded, it would not just be a victory. It would be a message that Earth was no longer the underdog, a message that humanity would no longer cower in the face of galactic might. As the fleet prepared to engage, Hayes's thoughts drifted to the battle ahead. He had seen the destruction the Rilthar could unleash. He had seen the devastation they could cause, the ruthlessness they had displayed in their previous conquests. But what they didn't understand was that humanity had a resilience they couldn't begin to comprehend. The humans didn't just fight to win, they fought for survival. And in that fight, they were more dangerous than any alien species could ever imagine. As the first wave of enemy ships appeared on the horizon, Hayes' lips curled into a grim smile. This wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But humanity would leave its mark on the stars, whether the Rilthar liked it or not. Let them come, he whispered to himself, his fingers tightening around the armrest of his chair. Let them come. The vast emptiness of space seemed to mock the alien fleet as it drifted forward, the silence stretching out into infinity. The stars were distant, cold pinpricks in the void, indifferent to the impending chaos. The Rilthar fleet, formidable as it was, felt strangely vulnerable. Their arrogance, once a shield, now felt like an exposed weakness. They had underestimated humanity, and in doing so, they had unwittingly signed their own death sentence. Zigithar stood at the helm of his flagship, the view screen showing the human fleet approaching from a distance. His sharp, predatory eyes studied their formations, looking for patterns, looking for weaknesses. But what he found only unsettled him further. The humans weren't fighting in the way he had expected. There were no desperate maneuvers or panicked retreats. There was only cold calculation. Captain Hayes is no fool, Zithar muttered under his breath, his voice tinged with a rare sense of respect. This won't be an easy victory. He turned to the tactical officer beside him, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a blade. What is their movement pattern? The officer's tentacles flicked over his console, analyzing the human ship's course. They are holding formation. Their ships are positioned in tight groups, suggesting they intend to use concentrated firepower. There's no sign of the panic we would expect from a species facing superior forces. Zithar's mind raced. If they weren't running, if they weren't desperately fleeing, then they were planning something. The humans had always been unpredictable, but now that unpredictability was becoming dangerous. They've learned, Zithar muttered. They're not running, they're standing firm. On the human flagship, Captain Hayes felt the weight of the moment as the enemy ships loomed closer. He had fought in countless battles before, but this one felt different. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was the moment that would either define humanity's future or see it obliterated. The stakes couldn't have been higher. "We're entering firing range," said his tactical officer, a young woman with sharp eyes. "Shall we prepare for the first volley?" Hayes nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He wasn't concerned about the battle just yet. He was focused on something more important: the message. The Rael'thar had come to Earth thinking they could crush them. They had expected a swift, easy conquest, but humanity wasn't like that. They didn't bow to anyone. They didn't run from a fight. And today, they would show the galaxy just how wrong the Rael'thar were. "I want everything ready," Hayes ordered, his voice calm but firm. "We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for the future of our species." The command was given, and the crew moved with practiced efficiency. The human fleet was a finely tuned machine, each ship a cog in a larger, unstoppable force. The Rael'thar might have superior numbers and technology, but humanity had something they didn't: unity, determination, and the willingness to fight for everything they held dear. The first shots rang out. A ripple of energy surged through space as the human ships fired their opening salvo. The alien fleet was quick to respond, returning fire with devastating energy blasts. The battlefield was soon filled with flashes of light, the stars themselves momentarily hidden behind the firestorms of war. Zithar watched as his fleet began to engage, his heart racing. The Rael'thar had superior firepower, superior shielding, superior technology, but they weren't used to facing an enemy that didn't back down. The human ships had adapted quickly, utilizing every inch of their limited resources to create a deadly force. The human ships, though technologically inferior to the Rael'thar's massive battle cruisers, fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. They moved in tight formations, using their agility to weave between enemy fire, making it impossible for the larger, slower ships to get a clean shot. Every time a Rael'thar vessel fired, a human ship dodged, retaliating with bursts of fire that landed with deadly precision. "What are they doing?" Vrish asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Their ships shouldn't be able to move like that. Their designs are archaic. They're using what they have." Zithar replied, his voice low and tense. "They've turned their weakness into a strength. They're not giving us a single opening. They're forcing us into a defensive position." Zithar clenched his fists. He had expected to be the one dictating the terms of battle, to be the one pushing the human fleet to the edge. But the humans were doing something unexpected. They weren't just surviving. They were adapting, overcoming, and, most alarmingly, they were pushing back. "We need to adjust," Zithar growled, his mind racing. "Increase our firepower. Bring the full weight of our fleet down upon them, on." The human side, Captain Hayes remained calm, his eyes scanning the battlefield. He could feel the weight of his crew's eyes on him, but he refused to crack. This was their moment. This was their time. Adjust fire to target their weak points. Hayes barked. "Focus on their engines. We need to disable their mobility. If they can't move, they can't escape." The human ships adjusted their fire, each shot calculated to hit the weak spots of the Rael'thar fleet. Their primary targets were the engines, the weak points that would render the enemy vessels immobile. But it wasn't just about crippling their ships. It was about showing the Rael'thar that the humans weren't here to be dominated. They were here to win. The battle raged on, each side taking casualties, each side gaining and losing ground. But as the minutes passed, something began to shift. The Rael'thar fleet, once sure of its superiority, now found itself on the defensive. The human ships had begun to land critical hits, their coordinated attacks chipping away at the Rael'thar's fleet, one ship at a time. Zithar's face was grim as he watched the carnage unfold. He had never imagined that the battle would take this long, that the humans would be capable of such resistance. And yet, here they were, proving him wrong at every turn. The Rael'thar had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. "Target." "And their flagship," Zithar commanded. "We end this now." But even as the orders were given, Zithar couldn't help but wonder, Had they already lost? The humans were relentless, and their refusal to break was something the Rilthar had never encountered before. And in that moment, Jithar realized something that sent a chill through his bones. The humans weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something far greater, something the Rilthar could never understand. And in that fight, they were willing to sacrifice everything, fire everything, Jithar muttered, his voice barely audible over the sounds of battle. And with that, the battle took a turn. The stakes had been raised. The human fleet would never surrender, and the Rilthar were realizing too late that underestimating humanity had been their greatest mistake. The once overwhelming silence of space was now pierced by the explosive symphony of battle. The fire of cannons, the blinding light of energy bursts, and the deafening roar of engines filled the void as both fleets clashed with unrelenting fury. The human fleet, though vastly outgunned and technologically inferior, had fought with a precision that shocked the Rilthar. Now, after hours of constant combat, the tide had turned. It was no longer about survival, it was about victory. Jithar's flagship, the heart of the Rilthar fleet, was reeling. The once imposing hull was now scarred with deep burns and gaping holes, a testament to the human fleet's relentless attacks. The alien commander stood at the center of his war room, his eyes fixed on the holographic map before him, the blinking lights of damage indicators flashing furiously. His fingers gripped the edges of the console, his mind racing. "We've lost half the fleet," Vrish said, her voice trembling. "The human ships are relentless. We cannot keep up this pace." Jithar clenched his jaw, unwilling to show weakness. The arrogance that had driven the Rilthar to this point was now their greatest flaw. They had underestimated humanity, assumed they were no more than insects to be crushed. But the humans, with their fragile ships and seemingly primitive technology, had proven to be the deadliest species the Rilthar had ever faced. "We need to retreat," Jithar said, his voice tinged with the frustration he could no longer hide. "We can't win this, not anymore." "But our pride," Jithar began, but Jithar interrupted him with a sharp glance. "Our pride will kill us if we let it," Jithar snapped. "We'll live to fight another day. We need to get out of here now." A tense silence fell over the room as the reality of their situation settled in. The Rilthar had always prided themselves on their invincibility, on their unbroken record of victory. But now, faced with the unrelenting force of humanity, they were broken. The Rilthar fleet had been torn apart, their ships drifting in the cold expanse of space like shattered fragments of their once mighty empire. "Prepare the escape pods," Jithar ordered, his voice cold and final. "We leave." Across the battlefield, Captain Hayes stood at the helm of the human flagship, watching the alien fleet begin to falter. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of victory. The battle had been long, and the losses on both sides had been staggering. But humanity had endured. They had proven that they were not weak, not powerless, and certainly not the easy targets the Rilthar had assumed them to be. "We've got them," Hayes said, his voice steady as he glanced at his crew. "They're retreating." The comms officer nodded, confirming the report. "They're breaking off, Captain. The Rilthar fleet is in full retreat." Hayes allowed himself a moment to savor the victory, but he quickly returned his focus to the task at hand. There was still work to be done. The human fleet had won, but it hadn't come without cost. Their ships were battered, their resources drained. They had sacrificed much to reach this point, and now was the time to ensure that the Rilthar would never again threaten their world. "Prepare a message," Hayes ordered. "We need to make sure the Rilthar know that this is far from over for them. They may retreat today, but we will find them, and we will ensure that they never forget who we are." Back on the Rilthar flagship, Zithar watched as his fleet began to make its retreat, the once proud ships of the Rilthar Empire slowly slipping into hyperspace, their engines sputtering weakly. The humiliating defeat weighed heavily on him. He had led his people to war with the belief that humanity was no more than a fleeting inconvenience, but he had been wrong. And now his people would pay the price for that arrogance. "Prepare to leave the system," Zithar ordered, his voice hollow. But as the fleet turned to leave, something caught his eye. A single human ship, battered and bruised, was approaching. At full speed, it had been part of the initial wave of attackers, and despite suffering immense damage, it was still functional, still alive. "We can't let them follow us," Zithar said through gritted teeth. "They must not chase us. We cannot allow them to hunt us down." The tactical officer looked up, his eyes wide. "It's coming straight for us, sir. It's the human flagship." Zithar's eyes narrowed. He had underestimated them once. He would not make that mistake again. The humans were not the same as the other species they had conquered. They had a spirit, a tenacity that was unlike anything the Rilthar had ever encountered. "Prepare to engage," Zithar ordered. "We'll make sure they don't get another chance." On the human flagship, Captain Hayes watched as the Rilthar flagship began to accelerate away, but something was different now. They weren't retreating in fear. They were retreating to regroup, to fight again. But Hayes wasn't going to let them off that easily. He had seen enough to know that humanity couldn't afford to back down now. The Rilthar had already underestimated them once. He wouldn't let them make that mistake again. "Chase them," Hayes ordered. "We're not done yet. We're going to make sure they know that humanity is not to be trifled with." The human fleet surged forward, their battered ships somehow finding new strength as they closed in on the Rilthar retreating force. The chase was on, and it wouldn't end until humanity had sent a message to the stars that would echo for generations. Zithar's eyes widened in disbelief as the human fleet closed in on them. He had never imagined this scenario, this relentless pursuit. The Rilthar had always been the hunters, never the hunted. But now they were fleeing for their lives with the full force of humanity at their heels. "Engage the hyperspace drive," Zithar barked. "We need to get out of this system, now." But it was too late. The human ships were too close. The Rilthar flagship was about to enter hyperspace, but the human ships were already firing, their weapons tearing into the weakened hull of the flagship. "No!" Zithar shouted, but his words were drowned out by the explosion that rocked the Rilthar flagship. The once mighty ship was torn apart, its hull collapsing as the human fleet's final volley struck true. As the Rilthar flagship disintegrated into the stars, the last thought that crossed Zithar's mind was that humanity had done the impossible. They had taken everything the Rilthar had thrown at them and had given it back tenfold, and in that moment Zithar knew that the Rilthar Empire, for all its might, was no longer the top predator in the galaxy. The humans had taken their place. Ta-tee! Battle was over. The Rilthar had been shattered, their fleet destroyed, their pride broken, but humanity had emerged victorious. The war was far from over, but Earth had sent a message: never underestimate them. "We've won," Captain Hayes said quietly as he watched the stars outside the viewport. "But this is just the beginning." As the human fleet began its journey back to Earth, Hayes knew that the galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had made its mark, and now it was their turn to lead.